All right, everybody, it's time for an introduction to DevOps. Now, we'll just say that this is going to be a high level walkthrough of what is the DevOps philosophy and what are we trying to achieve. We're not going to be diving deep or getting our hands dirty looking at the DevOps tools because it's really important that we understand the goal of DevOps before we just go and implement the tools. We want to know what we're actually trying to do here. So, what we'll talk about within this lesson are the challenges that DevOps help us to overcome. We'll discuss the processes and values, and then we'll take a look at what DevOps might be in practice. What sort of things should we expect? What improvements might we be able to make? And to help understand that, we'll also walk through a little bit of a scenario. So let's go ahead and get started by having a chat about the challenges that DevOps can help us to overcome. So far, we've already talked about the software development lifecycle and how we can face challenges when we have isolated teams. We've also spoken about how we can have negative culture, competing priorities, different tools being used, maybe even inconsistent environments being set up by all of these different departments like the dev team, the QA team, and maybe even the ops team for the production environment. We also have lots and lots of manual processes that help us to go from a developed solution through to a delivered solution that is available for our end users. Now, we've also spoken about how the result of these issues is going to be that our software releases are going to be slowed. We might even have really low quality solutions that contain lots of different bugs. And certainly when we look at how we are performing the different tasks related to software delivery, we've spoken about how commonly it can be quite an inefficient set of processes. So these are some of the issues and symptoms that we saw when we take a look at traditional software development. But moving forward, what we of course want to do is have a solution, and no real prizes here for guessing what solution I'm going to suggest. I'm going to suggest that we use DevOps. Now, all joking aside, I will say that DevOps has been quite successful in helping organizations to make a range of improvements, but it's not necessarily a silver bullet. It's not something that just works for everyone. You shouldn't just go and expect to institute a range of different DevOps tools and processes and make any improvements without actually understanding what you are doing. But with that being said, there definitely are some positive gains to be made. So when we take a look at DevOps, what we're talking about is fostering a culture of collaboration. We don't want to have these silos of different development teams, different operations teams, QA, security, and so on. However you choose to structure that within your organization, you want to ensure that these different team members are all working toward the same goal. So that's number one in terms of what we're trying to do with DevOps. Another common value when working with DevOps is this idea that you should be constantly experimenting, improving, getting feedback, and making changes, kind of along the lines of agile. We shouldn't just be stuck with these stale processes that don't change for a really long time. We should actually constantly be gathering data and highlighting whether there are any areas that we need to make improvements in. You can't, again, just expect to roll out DevOps and that's it, no changes. Okay, in technology, everything changes, so you constantly want to review, improve, see if there are any new tools or processes that you might use, or maybe if your own environment has changed and you've got newer challenges that you need to address. Lastly, the final thing I wanted to call out about DevOps is that you're going to hear the idea of automating all the things. Really, one of the common ways to make a range of improvements around the inefficient processes of old is by using the newer technology that helps us to automate things like software builds, software deployments, testing, and so much more. So this is a really high-level overview of what DevOps is talking about, taking a look at all of the old challenges that we have faced and looking at having a new approach to being more collaborative, more innovative, and more efficient. Now, when we're talking about DevOps, it would be remiss of me not to actually take a look at the DevOps infinity loop. So let's have a chat about that now. At the core of DevOps, we're talking about bringing the dev and the ops teams together. And when we think about the different tasks that they perform, we need to plan the work that we are going to do. Developers will need to code the solution, build it, test it, and ultimately we'll need to go and release that to our end users. Now, what we're really talking about here is a delivery pipeline. And we want to think of it as a pipeline that we can automate, improve, and really make sure that we're being very efficient about. Now, to do that, we want to make sure we are collaborating with the ops team. They can help out with deployment, operation, monitoring, and ultimately feedback any data that we need to reincorporate into improving the actual software solution itself. So this is the DevOps infinity or the DevOps loop. And whenever you look up DevOps, this is commonly something you are going to see. It's talking about having that delivery pipeline along with some constant and continual feedback that is intended to help make sure you are efficiently and rapidly deploying value to your customers. Now, although the name DevOps suggests that we are only talking about collaborating with the development and the ops team, what I'd like to say is that when you consider the values and you go and actually implement them in practice, you'll see that what we're really talking about is collaborating with all team members that we require to deliver the software value to our users. So it's often going to be more than just dev and ops. It should be dev, ops, QA, security team members. And ideally, you're going to want to collaborate more with the business to understand the values, the direction, and what it is you're hoping to achieve. So I wouldn't just think of DevOps as being dev and ops. Once again, if we consider the values first and foremost, we can see that although the name has been coined as DevOps, the intent is for us to collaborate with any and all teams that we require to rapidly and efficiently deliver value to our customers. Now, in practice, how do we actually go and do that? Well, there's a lot of common ways right now that you can do so. But again, I would encourage you to remember that you should be continually experimenting and innovating and looking for ways to improve that pipeline, whatever it might be. But commonly, that's going to be through approaches like automating your builds, automating your tests, automating your security scans, and automating your deployments. Now, how do we actually do that? Well, you're going to do that through things like infrastructure as code, where you can use code to actually go and define the solutions that you are building. Maybe you need some servers or services in the cloud. Maybe you need some sort of storage and network connectivity. If you can go and define that solution as code, you can really quickly and consistently deploy that as part of some build pipeline. But there's much, much more that we can do. We can do things like manage the patching of our underlying infrastructure, taking a look at the configuration and making sure it's all up to date. We can even be using solutions like containerization to help make sure that we are deploying consistent environments, whether it's used for development, QA, or production. We can go and have a range of vulnerability scans that is running across the code, the infrastructure, perform scripted testing to make sure that the solution doesn't have any errors, and we can have release pipelines to help actually go and get that solution out to our customer. Whatever tools you're using here, code scans, vulnerability scans, release pipelines, infrastructure as code, all of these different things, again, remember, the key point is that we want to use different tools and practices that suit our own organization, but that help us to be more collaborative, to work together, to rapidly and efficiently deploy ready-to-use software features and functionality to our end users. So now that we've spoken about all of the different sorts of philosophies and theory about what DevOps is, let's just really quickly walk through an example of DevOps in practice. Let's say that you've got the AussieMart web application that you've provided access to your end users. Now, traditionally, we would have done so with siloed development, operations, and QA teams that all had their own objectives, tools, processes, and so on. With DevOps, it's possible that what you want to do is build cross-functional teams. These teams could be made up of experts from the different areas, and you can make sure that they have the same tools, goals, and ability to work more closely together, maybe centered around things like products or features that you are developing. Whatever it might be, we want to avoid the traditional approach of having them entirely separate with competing priorities and different tool sets. So for example, you might use something like Kanban boards, which is a common work management tool set that helps you to easily visualize what's currently being worked on and what the priorities of your team are. I'd also say that it's really common to be using things like Git for source control, because if you've got lots of different team members working on the same code base, you want some ability to centrally manage that, centrally provide access to it, monitor and manage and approve changes, and so on. With these sort of foundational elements in place, you can go on to use things like Jenkins Automation, Azure DevOps, GitHub, and a range of other tool sets that are out there to help actually automate the different tasks that you need to perform as part of the development lifecycle. So let's say that we want to release a version 2 of our AussieMart store. What we can actually do is automate that. We can use some automation, whether that's Jenkins or something else, to go and automatically go and build our solution as soon as some changes have been made. We can even automate some tests that are being performed to ensure that that code only persists if it passes those tests. Now, if everything passes those tests successfully, we can even automate the provisioning of the underlying infrastructure that we require for staging our solution. Once everything's ready to go, we can deploy that solution automatically and even have some technology in there to automate the cutover for our users. Maybe we only want to cut over 50%, or maybe we want to only provide access to a range of different features. This is the sort of thing that we're talking about with DevOps in practice. All these different tools to automate things like build, test, deploy, provision, and even automated security scanning as well. So if we go and use something like this, if we transform our business to use DevOps practices, we can hope to see things like improved deployment frequency. We can go from deploying our solution every 3 months to maybe even deploying it every week or every day. We can reduce the amount of time it takes to deploy the actual solution using all of those different automation tools and things like infrastructure as code. And the idea here is that if we are automating these builds and these tests and we're doing it on a very regular basis, then the failure rate should be much, much lower. Your solution should be much, much more reliable. And because we are now working much more closely with people like the ops team, we also are going to be incorporating that continual feedback, data from our monitoring system. And so if there are any issues that arise, it should be much, much quicker for us to actually detect them and then for us to recover from them. So everybody, that's a really high-level overview of what DevOps is and what you can expect. Now that you've gained this understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve with DevOps, we can go on to further explore the different tools and processes that we can use to implement it. So everybody, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me. I'll catch you in another video.